Hear these words from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 14, verses 1 and 7 through 14. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lower place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He also said to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers and sisters or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. And you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Thanks be to God for this living word. This week, as I typically do, I read several commentaries on the passage that we just read together. And I found a common pattern arising between all of them that really surprised me. They all mentioned something about these parables being strange in some way. One even put the scare quotes around parable, as though it didn't really count as a real parable. And I get why. The parable is not a story with characters acting out a greater point, but rather something that really just looks like dinner advice, written in the second person when you attend a wedding banquet. We're all probably more used to the most famous and most well understood parables, like the parable of the prodigal son, or the shepherd who leaves the 99 sheep to go after the one that has been lost. But there are also many parables that do not have such a clear one-to-one application. Sometimes all of the characters in the story are bad, and there isn't a clear God figure like the forgiving father is in the prodigal son. And this is one of those cases where Jesus' parable doesn't fit into our expectations of what we've come to think a good, normal parable should look like, but instead expects us to mull it over, to take it seriously, and to come to see what truths we might find in that contemplation. But I actually think it's extremely important that Luke calls these teachings parables here. These words are teachable moments, meant to undermine the assumptions and habits of the audience, not to actually teach them ways to avoid embarrassment of being asked to move down to a different seat. Jesus has sat for dinner with the Pharisees, as he has several times before, and this time he dines at a leader's home. We would be safe to assume that the most elite religious people were in attendance. And Jesus offers this parable when he looks and sees the ways that they behave, watching how they chose places of honor. This may be a little bit strange to us. Jesus lived in a world that placed an immense emphasis on honor and shame. Now, we of course still have those concepts in our own culture, but we can't really understand just how impactful the feeling of dishonor was to a person of high status in Jesus' day. Yet this phenomenon that Jesus speaks of has not completely disappeared from our culture. I think there's always a question anytime we enter into a room, at a party or even at a church, of where we are going to sit. If there's someone important there, someone that we impress, or we respect, perhaps even a celebrity, we may be drawn to them We might want to sit in close proximity to them, as though their specialness will rub off on us in some way. Or we may actually choose to keep our distance out of a feeling of feeling unworthy. I think of a scene from the movie Mean Girls. I don't know if any of you have seen that movie from the early 2000s. That depicts a scene that depicts the average high school cafeteria. In it, Lindsay Lohan's character is learning how to fit into school after she spent the majority of her life being homeschooled in another country. Her new outcast friends give her a map of the school that includes a breakdown of the different tables in the cafeteria. The preppy kids sit here, the band geeks sit over here, we sit over here, but definitely avoid this area. That's where the plastics or the popular mean girls sit. While we might hope that our lives as adults are not so organized by cliques as they are for high schoolers, the truth is that we indeed play these games of space all of the time, whether we know it or not. And that's the message that Jesus is trying to get across. Yes, he cares deeply about meals and continually says that they are the site of theological inquiry, they're a site of social inclusion. But the point is not just about these meals. The message extends beyond the table to all of life. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. In a world of honor and shame, Jesus tells this crowd of elites to risk shame. Risk taking the lower status for the sake of true exaltation. For God takes the sight of shame and makes it holy. Jesus is to be lifted up on the cross. He is exalted in that act, in what was meant to be the most shameful form of execution. God always takes the lowly and lifts them up. Jesus turns directly then to the host, the leader amongst the Pharisees, and offers a second parable. When you host, don't only invite the rich who will return the favor to you, but invite those who cannot repay you. That is where true blessing lies, in unconditional giving, mirroring the love of God. This is the economy that doesn't make sense to the eyes of those who first heard this parable, and honestly to our ears today too. This is not a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It is a foolishness, honestly, to those who cannot see the blessings of the kingdom that Jesus speaks of. The joy that comes in a conversation with someone so completely different from you. The satisfaction of being God's hands for one in need. Jesus has looked around the party and seen the well-to-do attendees obsessing over seating and their proximity to the most important present. But he also sees all of those who are absent from this table. He sees those who are called sinners, who he often also dines with, who would never be allowed in. He thinks of those that he has been healing and caring for, who are too sick to attend, those who are counted out. Spaces have a power that we're not always aware of. There are histories of each space, violence that has set into the landscape that we cannot see. Whether in Confederate flags that hang from windows or just in odd looks from passerbys, some spaces harbor hatred that is visible to those deemed outsiders. The neighborhoods of Metro Detroit still hold the violence of years of segregation. And our country currently rages in debate over who is allowed to use a restroom in privacy. And trans and cis people alike are accosted for their presence. I once saw a stark reminder of the power of space and exclusion in the Chicago suburbs, actually, when I was washing windows. I saw a lot of very different suburbs in this job, not unlike Detroit, that ranged greatly in who clustered in each of these spaces. I had some businesses that I cleaned in a suburb called St. Charles, which in contrast to the Hispanic majority Elgin that we lived in, was a wealthy and predominantly white suburb. While working there one day, I saw a couple that had clearly been having a rough day or rough week, sitting down on a bench outside the building. The woman laid down on the bench and covered her eyes. But despite her complaints of a migraine, her partner urged her to sit up. We're in St. Charles. They won't let you do that here. That and countless other forms all make up a network of exclusion across our world. Jesus, amidst the preoccupations of all in the room, looked around and saw the power games that the attendees were playing, and saw the exclusionary power of the space that he was in. We must begin by adopting that same perspective. We cannot be blind to the violence of exclusion in every space that we step in, particularly when we have the privilege to be present that others might not. And we must ask ourselves the same question that Jesus asked the host. Who is on our guest list? Is it those who will be able to pay us back? Do we invite only those who we know will be able to support the church in worship? Do we invite others only in hopes that we'll grow and be a successful church in the eyes of the world? Jesus invites us, with the host, into the economy of God's kingdom, which asks for nothing in return from those who cannot give it, except for the blessings that come with their presence, and the glimpses of God that we see through them that we would miss if we hadn't invited them to the table. Doing so will break apart a system. This, if they adopted this, the demand that Jesus gives them would destroy the system of honor and shame that they were so accustomed to. And Jesus demands, too, that we leave behind the systems that create the same harm and exclusion today. How could we follow Jesus, who teaches us that grace comes as a gift, completely undeserved from God, out of an abundance of love in the world, for the world? And how could we claim that grace and not adopt the same mindset in our own lives? May we follow Jesus towards a wider table that feeds all. Amen.